Abdusalam Jibril for that background report. Let me quickly introduce our guest in the studio this morning. Professor Ken Ife is simply a development economist, but you can rest assured that he has quite a lot more accomplishments in his baggage, but simply development economist. Thank you very much, Professor
Thank you for inviting me.
Ni Akinshijo is an investment and financial analyst. Again, another fully loaded personality. Thank you very much for joining us.
So much.
And good morning, Nigeria. Kingsley.
Well, incidentally, there are two of the regular guests we normally have whenever we are considering economic issues on Good Morning Nigeria. And I'm sure that our viewers are fairly familiar with their faces. We're also going to have the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning join us this morning. But unfortunately, she's had some call upstairs, and so she has had to attend to that because it coincides with the timing of this particular program. We do hope that sometime in the nearest future we'll have the benefit of her presence to deal with matters arising from the recently introduced Nigeria Economic Sustainability Plan. Some of the highlights, of course, you've seen in our backgrounder by Abdusalam Jibril. But let's come now to our guest, beginning with Professor Ken Ife. Professor Ken Ife, contextualize the Economic Sustainability Plan. Why such a plan now? Is it necessary?
Anyway, you know that this is actually a culmination of plans that have been in place from what happened in 2016. You know there was a meltdown then. So there are a series of plans, and this is a culmination of it. And it's one of such plans because this dwelled more on fiscal area, whereas the monetary areas, you have the CBN with a lot of action and plans, different plans. Now, but what's special about this is that there's a handshake between the plans led by CBN and the plans led by that. There's a handshake, which hasn't been the case over the years, but it's very, very encouraging. Now, the plan locates itself on the need to bring in conventional wisdom on tackling recession of this magnitude, unlike the way we did it in 2016. And this is, what is the nature of the challenge? The nature of the challenge is that the supply chain disruptions and all the lockdown, all of them culminated in an assault on the household consumption, because household consumption is 84% of our GDP. Government is only 5.7%. And on our output, there's a huge contraction on the output. So you needed a quantitative response that actually puts resources at those two, especially the output one. The biggest link, the biggest failure in our production system is a tenuous link between agricultural production and processing. So that's that. So this plan is important. It's important because we needed to see that we are taking head-on the unemployment challenge is exacerbated. We also wanted to see that resources are being directed to where it's needed the most. And all of these are actually captured in this plan. And when we unpack it, you will see the integrity of this plan compared to what we have seen in 2008.
Mr. Ni, while also taking on the same question, I'd also like you to clarify for us, because a lot of Nigerians now, when they hear it, will seem to believe that this is simply targeted at, impact of COVID-19. Is that so?
Well, more or less. One, because it's conceptualized as a transition intervention. The Economic Recovery Growth Plan will be retiring this year, and in contemplating the successor to ERGP, it would have been a continuation of that momentum that the ERGP had garnered, since 2017, But suddenly, COVID-19 came onto the scene. So this principally is a response to the negative, of course, consequences of COVID-19, and it is important because it's an unusual unusual thing. It has an unusual impact, and therefore there's first a need to clean up, the environment, the economic environment, and the social environment, and then if we are going to go into ARGP2, as it were, it will be as a result of the level of mitigation that would have been achieved, with this plan,
ESP.
The ESP. So I think essentially I want to first the of the planners and the designers of the ESP, because if you start tracking what the government had been doing, just as Prof noted, I want to say that we have become experts, more or less, in managing recession. And that 2016 recession perhaps turned out positive for us. Without the 2016 recession, we may not have been likely, to respond to what is happening, at this time. It's the experience garnered during that time that has empowered the federal government, as it were, to be able to see and be able to also deploy a predictive capacity. In March, for instance, the federal government directed that $150 million, should be taken from the stabilization fund of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, to supplement whatever may be the shortcoming, the shortfall of FAC allocation, for the month of May, And it was like a strong prediction, because in April, the figures were still above 600 billion. In March, the figures were still above 600. But by May, the figures went under 600. So it was that figure, it was the withdrawal from the stabilization fund that helped, move the figures up. If without that, it's likely some states would not have been able to pay salaries for that month. So it talks to the predictive capacity, of the federal government. And this is what the ESP is also attending to. The Nigerian Bureau of Statistics told us that unemployment, had gone up. About 39 million plus Nigerians had lost their jobs. The National Employers Consultative Assembly said 75% of businesses, were not functional, as at May ending. And now, when you put all this together, it impacts what the summary of what the Prof had said: reduction in purchasing power, impact on supplies, and of course the capacity of manufacturers to produce more and all that. So the ESP is principally attending to this, addressing these challenges, and we'll see how we can stabilize the convoluted environment, as the convoluted economic environment, as it were, and then proceed, hopefully, after it would have cleaned up the environment.
Well, thank you, Nii. Professor Ken, are you satisfied with the processes that led to the articulation of the Economic Sustainability Plan in terms of the scope of consultation and the stakeholder interests that seem to have been accommodated in the consultation process?
Well, I think there was consultation, because I saw there's been regular meetings with various stakeholders coming. Even the Economic Advisory Council were involved, and the ministers were meeting. They were meeting regularly, because I was aware of that. But don't forget that they were on a narrow remit, because remember I said it's on the fiscal, or mainly on the fiscal response, and already the train has left, because many measures are already kicked in. So, but it was very important for a plan of this nature to come in to fill a gap. And the gap is this: where you have an assault on aggregate demand, which was evident, and then also there was a contraction, severe contraction on the output, then conventional wisdom says government has to up the expenditure. You have to spend, so that you can boost production and then also boost expenditure, especially household consumption, which I say to use it 4%. That wasn't the case in 2016. 2016 was a different kind of reaction where the bull was taken by the CBN. And as you know, they had a different kind of challenge because it was our appetite for importing, where your revenue dropped from $3.2 billion a year, a month, to $1 billion. And your request for forex went up to $4.6 billion. So there was no way you can match those. And so CBN had to go heavily on the demand management and identify those 32 items and clamp down on those. So but that's the rest of what you saw in ESP didn't actually kick in 2016 because they were fighting. Now, but here, the nature of this was it decimated consumption as well as aggregate demand and then also output. And then a lot of other were exogenous because the supply chain collapse from China affected almost everybody. And then all the airlines, all the sectors took a hit. That wasn't the case in 2008, and that wasn't the case in 2016. So you needed a strong fiscal quantitative response, and which was the gap that this NESP was doing.
Okay, thanks. I want to clear. I want to ask Nia the same question. Prof has already spoken around it because we know that state governors were also involved. The central bank and NNPC and, of course, private sector players were also involved. I'm asking this question because there seems to be very little, if you like, negative review of the economic sustainability plan since it has been released. It seems that everyone appears satisfied that, well, this is a stopgap measure, but a critical stopgap measure that we need to take. Is that heartwarming in any sense?
Very heartwarming, because of course the basis of the success of any policy it's dependent on the collaborative, ecosystem, for it to be effective. One, I also say this also talks to the vision of the president. At a time when the impact had not started showing at all, the impact of COVID-19 started showing at all. The president, when he announced the ESP in March 2020, it wasn't so obvious to the average mind that this is what we are going to go through, And if you look at the constituent parties in the committee, it's a representation of virtually every interest in the economic sphere, either at the interministerial level, because some ministries that were usually, alienated in discussions like this were actually brought in, and the private sector, the Economic Advisory Council, and all that were involved. The state governments were involved. So the president allowed a free rein of thought, Thankfully, the vice president, at a point in time, started sending appropriate the of the committee. It's not as if it was after the whole thing had been put together that Nigerians started hearing about the outcomes, the possible outcomes. During we were following discussions and conclusions. So by the time the final brew is made, everybody was actually ready, symbolically, with a cup. So, and I think it's superb, again, as Prof noted, it's actually bringing together some of the policies that are in place, either in terms of creating credits, in terms of providing comfort for banks, to review credits that had been issued already and all that. So, and everybody, for me personally, for instance, in my field, it is a major comfort for those of us in that field, especially when you have to consider what credit burden would have been, in this present circumstance. People that secured so much, in 2018, 2019, and their loans still subsist at this time. And they were not able to be involved in any productive activities over the last 3 months. And they are supposed to pay credit, to pay interest, and some supposed to start paying their principal. So the news coming in from that deliberation had told us that the central bank had given the money deposit banks, the policy to start reviewing credits. And now, what we've had is that, a number of my clients are involved, more than 32,000, credits are being reviewed, which is good.
Okay, Professor Ken Ife, let's begin to unbundle this package. And the international financial institutions have already warned. Some say we may need as much as $50 billion to address our COVID-19 burden. And the plan has come up with this package, a stimulus package of 2.3 or 1 trillion, 2.3 trillion naira, based on certain assumptions. Now, let's look at those assumptions in terms of the oil, benchmark, and of course the exchange rate.
Well, first of all, let's compare like to like. How have other other countries responded in the same way? U.S. put out $3.2 trillion, which is 15% of their GDP. UK, 330 billion pounds, which was also 15% of their GDP. Japan, 20% of their GDP. Germany, 60%. Well, how has Nigeria compared to those? If you put our 3.5 trillion from central bank and then 2.3 trillion and a few other bobs around the corner, we will be heading to about 5% or just a little over 5%. But this is a work in progress. And we're not throwing money at the problem, but we are building capacity to spend more. And we have to respect the fact that the government has not been idle looking at this. So that's why I say that this is work in progress. The NESP just came in to join the queue and bring things together. There have been series of actions on the ground already, both at the fiscal level, monetary level, than at the fiscal level. Coming down to your, what was it again?
Yes, what the right. Reality of the assumptions.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, yes, the focus, of course, is to support employment-intensive industries. Employment-intensive industries. Of course, also to support consumption, because as I said, this is actually an attempt to do what we haven't been doing before, to use the spend to increase resilience in the economy. But some of what's the composition of the 2.3 trillion? Already 500. Some of them 1.2.
We're coming from the oil revenues.
Yeah, no. I'm coming.
Okay.
1.2 trillion of that was going to be loan from central bank, and that is really around 10%. You remember that is the number 6 item on the macroeconomic convergence criteria for ECOWAS. Is the central bank not putting more than 10% of her. So that's just around that.
So that explains that.
So yeah, that explains that. Then there's also the 300, there's 500 billion, which is the money is there. It's there because these are taxes that are being paid, but are located within ecological fund, education trust fund, UBEC, the universal. So these monies are there, but they're just doing some house cleaning, just bringing them out, and that's 500 billion. That's there. Then of course there is the 300 billion, 350 billion, which are the ones that one already we've given. One is to do with multilateral, the bilateral donations from other, and we're already getting money from the EU. Gave us some billions, and some are coming. Some are coming via ECOWAS, some are coming directly. So that is not wishy-washy. Then the other one is the other 300, which could be loan of some sort. And we are getting them. IMF has given $3.4 billion. And then we're eligible. No, many countries are not even eligible to lend, to borrow. because they haven't got the sufficient capacity to borrow this money. We are lucky that we have. So I can see that money is achievable. That 2.53 is there. We're saying we want more. And then we're going to worry about the disbursement of this. Okay. And to what extent will these projects create economic activity, sustainable economic activity?
I just wonder, Prof, I mean, so that we don't get the impression that the federal government is now going to bring out 2.3 trillion naira and say, like I'm sure you'll be very happy to take it. I say, take. And then Kingsley, you are certainly not. I mean, as you said, we're unpacking all of this and some of the sources of revenue for funding this project. Those are the things that you've just highlighted. But I want to come to Niyi, and then let's unpack it further, because one of the major challenges that we have often faced has been the lack of synergy between the national and subnational governments. On this account, the subnational entities have been part of the conversation that led to the enunciation of the plan. But still, the subnational entities are also beneficiaries of this whole package. There are two things that I find very interesting in all of this, because oftentimes you find that the subnational entities, in this case the state governments, get broke almost on a routine basis. Now the government is saying, let them have elbow room to renegotiate the repayment of their bailout. Second point is that they also now have an opportunity of renegotiating their ISPOs. ISPOs meaning irrevocable standing payment orders. Those are the kind of loans they take from commercial banks, and those loans and the interest rates are usually usurious. So how do you read this? Is there, I'm sorry, with the greatest respect to the subnational entities, is there a capacity to actually leverage on this and ensure that they're able to tide over while we are battling with coronavirus and its consequences?
I think there should be. So it is about philosophy, especially where the leadership at the federal level, there may be a sort of consideration of equality, in our constitution, in the roles and the status of subnational and the federal. But the important thing is that if you have a federal government that is actually playing a leadership role in the federal system, it's most likely the subnationals will latch on, to the texture of outlook and direction being provided by the federal government. And I think to a large extent, because the federal government had also involved them in this planning. So it's the same commitment that is being given by the federal government is likely to be provided by the subnationals. And going beyond that, the comforts, as I like to put it, provided by first suspending interest charges on their bailout loans, and of course the ISP2, it's one of their own, it's two of their own demands going into that negotiation. It's a negotiated outcome. They've been at this actually since 2019, before the coming of COVID-19. So when this happened, it was just a natural condition, to be given consideration. But I think going beyond that is what the monetary authorities are done, and I'm even going beyond what the subnationals will do. Let's quickly unpack this. The subnationals, one of the contents of the plan is to have new agricultural farmlands, of up to 20,000 to 100,000, between 20,000 to 100,000 in each state of the federation. Now, that is empowering the subnationals. Now, the quantum of fund available for me is not the issue, for disbursement during this period. Yes, we know the plan is going to provide succor to farmers, provide succor to manufacturers, help stabilize employment, make sure that private industries and manufacturers are not laying off staff and all that. But what is important is that at the point in time when nobody was thinking that the cost of credit, the cost of loan will come down, that Nigeria would actually take an accommodative position, in loan. The CBN reduced its benchmark rate from 13.5 to 12.5. No, it's what that show when you do the proper calculation is to say that you are saving more than 1 to 2 trillion, in terms of what the users of credit loans would have paid. So that is making money cheaper for those who will secure it, for manufacturers and households that secure it.
And also available.
Yeah, and of course you have the 50 billion naira, the targeted credit facility, that had actually been exhausted, and which is good for us. One at a very low rate, 5%, and it is not just targeted at manufacturers and farmers and all that. It's also targeted at household consumption, which is important, which is the base of all this. About 49 billion we had been disbursed to more than 80,000 Nigerians, and the effect of the LDR, which I always commend the Monetary Authority for, because one of our major challenges since 2016 recession is that banks, not even since 2016, it has been a tradition. Banks don't usually lend money, to the real sector in Nigeria, So by compelling banks to increase their threshold of lendings to private sector, is also putting money into the system. So much that between September and April, from figures we have now, more than 3 trillion naira credits have been created. That is.
How does this benefit the informal sector that are not captured by all the, financial statistics? Yes.
We'll come to that.
Yes.
Well, it's
Because
part of the
yes.
plan too. It's actually part of the plan, the informers, and it's specific. In fact, for the first time in Nigeria, there is a plan that does not only identify but defines by nomenclature those segments of the informal sector, tailor, organizer, and all that. They are in the plan, which is it shows that the designers of the plan have their feet on ground.
And disbursement plan too, I hope, because Doctor, you mentioned that it was going to be a challenge.
Claire, you keep talking about disbursement. Like people not assume. I don't know. The guests are here to explain. When you say disbursement, it's like there's some handout out there. So,
So how does it? How does, for instance, you have said to create by this plan, 10 million jobs will be created in 12 months for food for all projects. Mass housing strategy, creating 1.8 million jobs. Mass housing strategy for who? Who are the beneficiaries? Kingsley?
It's actually identified. And this plan is like a primary school ABC brochure. And if you have access to it, if you read it, there are no Greek, in between. This 300,000, the housing unit that talks about creating 1.8 million jobs is functioned on a 300,000 housing units that will be built. And that those housing units will not just be built by anybody, but professional young Nigerians. Forming cooperatives, professional, it's identified. So which means if you are not young, you've been qualified.
Then of course, we'll have to define who is young.
No,
because I'm young.
Well, anyway, we know who's young. and that all products that will be used, for this particular program must be generated internally.
Which, of course, speaks to local content. And further implementation of Executive Order 003 and Executive Order 005.
And as you are using that, you are also creating indirect jobs along the value chain.
All right, let's bring in Professor Ken Ife this time.
There has been a very cordial relationship between the federal government and the subnational entity called the state governments. If you notice that immediately after swearing in the president in 2015, the first thing that he had to tackle was the imminent collapse of the funding of the state governments. And he asked the CBN to provide over 600 billion and all of that. Then from there, they entered into the Paris Club disbursement, and it has always been one after the other. And even if you look at the highlights of the 774,000 jobs, it's 774 local government times 1,000 jobs in each local. It's not about 775,000 jobs being created in Abuja headquarters of federal government. It's not that. And then you also hear what you just mentioned, the 20 to 100,000 hectares to be cleared in every state. It's to be cleared by the state, not an entity owned by federal government sitting somewhere as a house. So there has been all that. And if you interrogate the 10 presidential value chains, which CBN is pushing, it's all about working with the state government. I've attended many of the meetings, governors in the office of the governor of central bank, looking at the palm oil value chain. We require 100,000 hectares from each of you, 12 of the states. I have 100. It's all about the states taking the charge. But then the difference from all the programs we've seen before is end-to-end intervention approach from the CBN. Because it says, I'll fund clearing, land development, mechanization, seed production, distribution of all the way to market. And they created anchors who are aggregators, or could be processors, or could be market. So it's a good arrangement. But can I tell you something? If we didn't take the action, if that bank didn't take the action it took in 2016 by looking inwards, we would have been in a terrible situation. Because at the beginning of the COVID, some countries were not prepared to send rice to Nigeria. India wouldn't send pharmaceutical ingredients. So that derailed our pharmaceutical industry because they depended wholly on import of APIs and add water and maybe their starch to compound tablets. But that was what was going on. We were in trouble. If we didn't take the action that they took, we would have been on our knees in terms of food security. Of course, remember, part of this argument is humanitarian responses. You saw 75,000 tons of grains leave the strategic reserves for distribution, showing that we were prepared for the rainy day. So, given all that, the other monetary measures that complements this plan, this ESP plan we are talking about, is the first thing that the CBN did was to protect the financial system integrity, so that the health crisis doesn't transfer into a banking crisis, financial crisis, and then granted regulatory forbearance on the banks to restructure loans, which you were also talking about. And that is why we are even talking about restructuring some of the ISPOs. And the CBN had to grant them that regulatory forbearance. And even before we got to this point, it's been on the bank had acrobatic mentality in terms of how they were chasing the commercial banks up and down everywhere. They even allowed them to come and take from the 4 trillion naira cash reserve ratio held by the bank, any zero interest for the bank. Say, come and take this money and lend it at 9% interest, 7 years, which is medium term, and with some moratorium. They opened it up, and then they went on loan to deposit ratio to up it, as long as it's targeting the real sector. And as well, so many measures were invoked, or not to talk about the domestic finance intervention that was heading to about 2 trillion. So all of those prepared us for this COVID-19, as if they knew it was coming. Then in the case of the fiscal authority, look at the budget of 2020 and the Finance Act. It was ready, it was preparing as if they knew this was coming. Granting remember what I said about making sure that money is kept at the level of the household, because that allowed small businesses to go up to 25 million before they can get into all this VAT palaver or even pay tax. It was preparing for a day they didn't see coming, and now that day has arrived. We would have been far more vulnerable as an economy if all these measures were not in place.
Okay, Professor Kenife, I'll still come back to you to look at I'm just folding my arms because when it comes to matters of finance, and I'm very, I'm very cautious, but I just want us to make it more realistic because a lot of people are watching, those that have been affected by COVID-19, majority of whom are not formalized. They are more of the informal sector who would probably be wanting to hear and waiting to access this very laudable plan. But just to say that you can be part of this program, Good Morning Nigeria. You can send in your suggestions, your comments via our Twitter handle at NTA GMN. It will be displayed on the screens in a short while. So, Professor Ken, if we're looking at...
All right, let's talk about informal sector.
Yes, let's look at...
The informal sector,
yeah, because
actually,
the unemployment level now, like Nies said earlier on, by NBS, is high, over 30%.
That's correct.
This is still within the plans, financial plans, and all the credit facilities. So are we sure that this, what we have now would help to address, for instance, this unemployment gap?
So widely dispersed, how might they organize so that they take advantage of the key benefits in such a plan? Nii was talking earlier about professional groups, young professional groups forming cooperatives and therefore playing a role in the mass housing program. Now, the tailors, the vulcanizers, these are not just mere artisans, who are on the street. How can they organize to say, look, we know that this thing is going on. First of all, we want to be enlightened as to what is playing out. And then this is how we can access this, and this is how we can further drive our business. How might that happen?
I'll give you, you've mentioned some example. Let me just give you one other example.
That's right.
If you look at what CBN is doing with Anchor Borrowers Program, you see that they have a new category of lending criteria where they are actually going out for 1 million hectares for different value chains, and it is 1 man, 1 hectare. Now, that you can't go below that. That is, everybody is in, provided you can supply your VCB, what do you call it? That
BVN.
Something like that, yes. You have to supply that, supply your name, so your identity can be established. And I've seen them clearing hundreds of thousands of your informal sector, all of them, but 1 man, 1 hectare. I've seen them on the rice value chain, over 200,000 hectares of people. I've seen 1.6 million people doing 1.7 million hectares. That is the biggest way you can help this economy, because what you are doing here, you are integrating subsistence farmers into the national and global supply chain by connecting them as outgrowers. So it's no longer just 1 man comes with 50,000 hectares and you collect them. No, it's everybody has a role to play. You're linking them. And then you now have other things. This is getting even more complex. But having said all that, you raise a very genuine question. How do we ensure greater diffusion of the resources that we have to the base of that economic pyramid? And I'm afraid I have to say to you that I also have some concerns. I have concerns that much of the intervention funds are warehoused through the commercial banking sector.
Yeah.
And of course, they still have to improve their integrity in reaching that base of the pyramid. So in other words, what are other creative mechanisms? And I have actually been talking to the CBN, I'm talking to the ministers, I'm talking to them about alternative ways of making sure that we can augment resources. Because there are platforms now that can take the intervention fund in, bring national savings money from bonds in, bring grants from federal government, bring grants from over $4 billion a year from development partners. Bring all those into the pot and then get some fund managers in to focus on value chains. Because one thing is to drop money to players along value chain. The other one is to have a dedicated fund manager for a value chain, for cotton value chain, that makes the link and ensure that it breathes life and longevity and energy to the value chain. So we need to have a value chain approach.
Yeah, who is that monitor, in your opinion, or who should be that monitor of this value chain disbursement, this value chain activity, so that the person has a wide-angle view of what is going on? I said a person or institution or agency, you have a wide one, and then you can report back when things are going well or when things are going wrong, so that appropriate intervention can then be made. You have a sense of what
that is in the works. I couldn't give you much of the details on the screen here, but there are on the works. First, how to aggregate the resources, because we have huge intervention resources, but we also have huge bonds. Look, if we get the national savings schemes working on individual, corporate, public, diaspora, we will have over 50 trillion naira available within the next few years, and government's recourse to foreign borrowing will reduce, because you borrow the money and then use it for development. So they're all on the works. So but I've said that we are looking deeply into those platforms that will make the more. And then let me give you another example. One of the biggest challenges that the banks have not been as high risk is how money is managed by people, beneficiaries. You know how they get the money they buy car instead of doing what they're supposed to do, changing. You have moving from productivity from 1 ton per hectare to 5 tons per hectare. Cassava from 18 tons per hectare to 50 tons per hectare. Rice from 2 tons per hectare to 6 tons per hectare. So you've got those coming out to you where you are. You don't have to come to Lagos no, they will be delivered to you, to your doorstep. You have all the fertilizers. The fertilizers are blended to the texture of the land. Not what we were having before. Import them no, you can't have one size fit all. Then all the other herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, all of them are on the works. Okay. So, there are actions, but we don't know that much. But it is going on right now.
Okay.
I just wanted to dimension.
Sorry, Kingsley, I'm sorry. Let's quickly, because I don't want to stop you let's quickly go on a short break. When we come back, you respond to Kingsley's questions, and I'll also ask you, Mama. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll be right back.
For over 70 years, we've practiced healthy hygiene habits together. The world needs us to keep our fight going against germs. So let's wash our hands for 20 seconds regularly. Dettol. Protect what's worth fighting for.
As a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19. A corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number 0800 22 55 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
Nigerians, let us take responsibility. Stay healthy, stay safe, and curb the spread of the virus. Take responsibility. The coronavirus spreads from one person to another. Let us avoid crowd gathering of any kind for any reason. Take responsibility. Avoid traveling from one state to another during these lockdown restrictions. Obey all the rules that are put in place. Take responsibility. Stop spreading fake news and unverified reports about the coronavirus. There is no known cure for COVID-19. Take responsibility. Observe all the measures that can help stop the spread of the virus. Together, we can do this, but only if we take responsibility. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of NTA. Let's return to our guest now. You wanted to, of course, take off from where Prof. Ken Ife had made some substantial intervention.
I was thinking of addressing Claire's, how do I call it, discomfort, in the matters of the informal sector, and of course the interlocutors in the whole process. The truth of the matter is there's a paradigm shift. If you are in the industry, you see it. It's very obvious. And I make the targeted credit facility, the 50 billion naira targeted credit facility scheme, my example here. One, the CBN, which of course is the originator of the money, decided not to use commercial banks for on-lending, for the facility. They decided to adopt its own microfinance bank, the NIRSA, Nigeria Incentive-Based Risk Lending for Agriculture. NIRSA has branches virtually in all states, and the CBN insisted that it's only NIRSA that would disburse, the fund, one. Two, at the initial stage, the NIRSA came out with a number of conditions, inclusive of presenting a business plan and a guarantor before you could secure the fund. But a number of people raised issues. You are targeting the poor, more or less, because you said anybody, either at the level of the micro or small enterprises can apply, plus households. Why would you now need a business plan? Because people who would write business plan would charge money, And the CBN intervened, removed this business plan from it. NIRSA, of course, announced that. Then the next thing was guarantors. In the typical Nigerian culture, those who were to stand guarantee were interested in a certain percentage of the money coming to them. This also got to the CBN, and they directed that guarantors, again, should be removed from the process of securing. So whoever applied for that loan had no need to present a business plan or a guarantor. And of course, any other person, what you only needed was to have a bank account. Of course, if you have a bank account, you have a BVN. And the basic level of formalizing is a business. And when we talk about informal sector, the difference, the bridging between being in the informal sector and being in the formal sector is to have a name, a business name. And that business name could actually be yours, and that you now have a relationship with a banking institution where you can say you have a BBN for that business name. You have become formal. It means that when anybody wants to do business with you, either the federal government, the state government, or even your contract, the person you are seeking contract from, is not dealing with you on your name basis, but on your business name, your corporate name. That's the formal issue we are talking about. And in this business, in this sustainability plan, there are specific mention of increasing the rate of formalization in a way that business registration would be faster. And of course, we have seen that. The process of business registration is revolutionary in Nigeria. In fact, to the extent now that the CAC is saying, if you register your business, you can be sure you have your tax identity number coming out with it.
How might those in the informal sector who need to transition into formality, how might they get that proper enlightenment? tailors and those who produce PPEs and other critical equipment, the government will readily buy from those persons. Aba, for instance, is a major hub for all of it. So is it not possible to target those ones? And the apparel that you and I wear, there are certain parts of the country where you can often refer to as the headquarters for kaftan production in this country. I mean, kaftan sewing and so on and so forth. Might we not target those entities and those who play around those sectors rather than some of these disparate elements that might, of course, education is always a factor in all of this?
I think it's ongoing, really, because don't forget that the vice president is at the head of this entrepreneurial clinic, since 2018, and it has always been meeting with clusters. I know it was in Aba, and through that the boots manufacturing contract with the Nigerian Army, was. Of whatever this is. And I hope that would continue. It's about an authority government leading the charge in the information sector. And wherever the vice president was at that time, there was also CAC and related agencies doing registration. And the ESP, as it was, also identified that the process of securing licenses, registration, business concessions and all that, they are in black and white, So I am believing that the appropriate agencies, the NDE, for instance, should have a proper understanding and context of the 774,000 jobs that will be created, and they will come out, and talk about it. Smidan, I am thinking that agencies involved would actually lead the thoughts, on the ESP as it affects them individually. That way, it's easier to put in context the ESP.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I'm glad you actually raised the challenges of the textile industry. And I have witnessed firsthand the high order of targeting of this industry by government. We've lost well over 1.2 million jobs in the industry. If you go to Kano and Kaduna and the likes, there are graveyards, industrial graveyards of this. And what the CBN has done was to attack it from different angle. One, I mentioned the cotton industry associations. They are heading for 1 million hectares of cotton. So there will be a cotton glut in the country. Then there is the issue of how about the garment manufacturers and all that. I have actually witnessed a meeting in the CBN governor's office where all the cotton manufacturers were on one side of the table, and all the uniformed officers, NYSC, Army, Navy, Air Force, police, they were all on the other side of the table. And then they were reading the Riots Act to them. That, we now have presidential order 003, you have to buy local. In fact, as a matter of fact, what is your problem? They said, well, quality. Well, they said they met all the quality requirements. Then they put MOU on the table. You both must sign it. If you don't sign it, if you don't operationalize this, don't come to me for foreign exchange because I'm not going to give you. And then they turned to the people on the other side, that's the garment manufacturer, and said, look, I know all of you. If you smuggle in any textile or dump, I'll blacklist you. Can you see how far that they had to go to read the Riots Act? And now there's action and there's traction. Mm-hmm. So that's what is happening. But many people don't know that this is going on.
I think that's part of what Lee just said, that some of the agencies would need to further expose what's playing out in their respective sectors so that there's further understanding of what the economic sustainability plan is all about, especially as Professor Kenife had already indicated that the economic sustainability plan is like a successor plan to various measures and activities already taking place. I was just wondering, on the 774,000 jobs, we don't minus the controversy arising from the National Assembly with the Honorable Minister of State, who is, of course, standing his ground on what to do. How might this play out? Because you see, you want massive public works in 3 months. I don't know. Does this seem realistic?
Well, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. And I thought that first step was a 3 months pilot to see what lessons can be learned. You know, you can't actually jump into a large-scale expenditure and plan without testing it. You have to test it. So that's how I see that it is just a test. And also, I am aware that many MDAs and states are asked to come up with, their public works programs, and that the National Directors of Employment is dealing with the disbursement at the salary payment side. They are dealing with that, while the actions themselves are connected to, different people are connected to what has to happen in each local government. So it's not like one person is having everything. So there's a clear division of labor in all of that. But there are issues about, is that going to be sustainable? Is that going to lead to job? We want money spent on any person to be in economic activity that can generate income. In that way, you are not throwing money at the problem. And that's the challenge. So that's the second challenge, because the first challenge is how can you guarantee that the resources reach the informal sector? Then the other one is, how does that activity create employment, create sustainable employment, sustainable output from where you have economic activity coming in. That's the second challenge.
Okay, thank you, Professor Ken Ife. We have grades, we'll take them, but I'd like Niyi to respond to this question. Let's look at M&E. Already, it is generating some concerns. We saw what happened at the National Assembly with the Minister of State, for labor over the, 774,000 jobs. So how will this plan be monitored, so that it doesn't get hijacked by certain people with vested interests, certain, agencies or certain implementers?
Well, I think the traditional limitations, to government programs and projects like this had always been that tendency to hijack. But again, if you look at N-Power, especially, there's a new template in place now. One, it's digitally driven, and there are testimonies that you don't know anybody. There's no man, no man, to get into that portal and get selected. I think that is what the federal government is trying to evolve to and adapt to the 774,000 jobs. One, committees per states, have been put together, and these committees are constituted by mass-based groups, not Nigerian Union of Road Transport Workers, market women, and of course Neighborhood Watch and all that. These are people that connects with the grassroots, and of course the jobs are principally won for people at the base. In fact, the base of the base, that is one. Then two, for me, I think it's a brilliant idea, because you are now percolating funds, money, to the lowest level in a rapid, for want of use of word, in a rapid format. Because for money to move from our budgetary system, for instance, when money is allocated and is disbursed, for it to move to the last man at the local government, it may take up to 3 weeks before a naira of that gets to that.
You know why I asked this question?
So, sorry, let me just land on this. But with this, you are putting 48 billion naira thereabouts right into the confines of local governments. and you are energizing business activities, commercial activities at that level. More rice seller will sell their rice. More yalamala will sell their amala. More Indomie noodles vendors will do that. The tailor, will be patronized. Carpenter furniture maker will be patronized. All business, all probable informal sector operators that you are talking about are going to be the beneficiaries of the spending of this money, because the bricklayer that will be employed, the cleaners that will be employed, the florist that will be employed will be coming back home to make their purchases in their streets.
Okay, you know why I asked this question? It's because already the Minister of State for Labour has directed, we read it somewhere in social media, that work should go on. That's on the 774,000 jobs, irrespective of the controversy it generated, the bottleneck it met at the National Assembly. Might these, initiatives get legislative support, going by what we have seen?
Well, I think it is a plan. Is a plan already in place. Is a plan at work. The National Assembly is making an intervention, more or less. But of course, the Constitution is very clear. Who is responsible for what? Who is responsible for implementing this program is the executive. So and of course, it's the issue is at play in the public space. It's politics.
Okay.
Let me comment on your question on M&A. And just use example. You notice you were describing the sequence of the lending of the National Microfinance Bank and why they were now asked to drop the business plan, drop the guarantor. It wasn't drop it for them to carry the money and run away. It's not going to happen. Let me link it. CBN in their contract for the outgrower scheme prevented the subsistence farmers from side selling, and says if you side sell, because you are bound into get your produce, aggregators are aggregating it, and they've given you training, they've given you inputs, and they have a fixed price for you to return. You want to start side selling, I'll blacklist you. Blacklist you across all banks, because they have your CBN, your BVN. They have your BVN. Yes. Now that BVN comes in, the association will come. I have 200,000 members for 200,000 hectares. The CBN says, send me all the list of all your members. And of course, they've all provided their BVN and all that. And they will run a check. They will discountenance half of them because they're already owing. They haven't paid. They've done that. They are guilty of selling. Then you see how that is working. Yeah, then you now come to people who are taking 50 billion. Take the money and think is a national cake. They've got your BVN. And if you don't pay, you're blacklisted. And then and the ripple is that even any bank where your money is, they are now able to take the money from work.
All right, that's interesting. As Claire said, we have a number of tweets that have come in. We'll go through those tweets now.
Okay, I start?
Yes, please.
Okay, Yaya Wada tweets, good morning, crew. I'm always impressed with the proactiveness of the present leadership, most especially as the Vice President is the one chairing the Economic Sustainability Plan. Just like they did to bring Nigeria out of recession in the past, we expect positive outcome.
Now, Mike Ayankwa tweets, the Economic Sustainability Plan undoubtedly is a veritable tool to fast-track governance in view of drawbacks in the economy as a result of COVID-19. Like yesterday's topic on local content, there must be deliberate policies to look inwards now to rejuvenate our economy.
And Daily Jack Solomon, lack of demand for oil and gas could reduce domestic oil production and supply in the short to medium term, as oil demand significantly.
Will bring about financial inclusion, create employment opportunities and avenues for economic empowerment and a gender agricultural revolution.
Festus Akimboyewa, NESP is a sound economic plan. If pursued seriously, Nigeria can earn billions of dollars from food productions like palm oil, Government should also bail out the manufacturing sectors as they can contribute positively to the economy.
Mutana Farouk, now just like the topic discussed yesterday, which was on local content, by the way, setting up NESP is one of the best frameworks for economic recuperation. The mantra of Mr. President, grow what we eat and eat what we grow, must be obeyed.
And Nuhu Mohammed, no society can succeed without a solid economic foundation. We can testify that agriculture is booming and helping rural people to gain back their respective way of living. Our economy can do well. When textile industries are fully back, cultural artists receive government support, and local production and consumption is emphasized.
Now, Dom Wuyeb, if the spread of the coronavirus is contained, the economy will bounce back. However, the pandemic should be considered an opportunity to make way for a new environmentally friendly economy in order to work towards a better nation in the post-pandemic era.
Francis Obi, if the government comes out with a good economic policy and avoid reckless spending, the economy will bounce back. They should ensure that there is steady electricity so that private people will help in kick-starting the economy.
Amabala Hababs, measures such as the NESP are germane at this time. Such plans couldn't have been better conceived.
And Law Afosi, diversifying the economy is the way to go, and it's heartwarming that present administration is towing this line in view of the fall in oil prices across the globe, thereby making it imperative to find solutions to economic growth internally.
Eno Ayuk, government should invest in agriculture and food security to create employment and focus on increasing land under cultivation with state governments, constructing rural roads on the agro corridor to facilitate transportation of produce to markets.
And Angela Daniel, that's the first lady tweet coming from a lady. Angela Daniel, after going through some of the things that would be carried out by the Economic Sustainability Plan, I have come to realize that it will certainly serve as a mitigating factor to the impact of COVID-19 and drop in global oil prices. If NESP is fully implemented, we will be good.
Akawula Bello, NESP is a laudable plan, but my fear is in its implementation. But of course, our two guests have already spoken to some of the challenges that might arise and of what role M&A could play. I just wanted us to consider this very briefly. Yes, the plan is not isolated. And there's an indication from what you have said, gentlemen, that the plan appears to be heavy on the fiscal side. But we have also seen some movements on the monetary side. I'm sure, we all go to the market. You can see how inflation is rising gradually, measure of exchange rates, and in fact, not just inflation rising, you're having instances of price gouging. If you go to the pharmacies, you'll see medicines that you could buy for 1,000 naira, some weeks ago now, those medicines are going for 4,000 or 5,000 naira for no justifiable reason. They just explore exploitation. I will mention the names of those pharmacies, assuming I'm challenged to do that. Some of them, they are so desperate now that they have removed the old price label. They don't have enough time to replace them with the new price label. All of that is playing out. So you're getting people into economic activity. In the meantime, whatever gains they may get from those economic activities might just leak away on account of inflationary pressures and the price gouging that we are seeing. How do we deal with this, gentlemen, very briefly? So, Prof, quickly, and then...
The inflation is a moving target, I keep saying. And some of the things you just described is traders are there to take advantage of any situation by hoarding the goods, creating artificial scarcity, and then gradually bringing them in.
Which are felonies.
They do that all the time. Yeah. Then whenever there is an award, a new prize award, they saw the salary adjustment, they will start their own adjustment in the market ahead of the payment of the minimum wage. So that's to be expected. Let alone when you had a supply chain disruption. They have all the excuse to do what they're doing. But the thing is that is a component of inflation. But the biggest challenge we have in inflation is the food basket sub-index. So, and we know that the challenge is huge because the agroecological footprint is shrinking, various crises in different northeast, northwest, north central, and all of that. And then, of course, lack of processing
Lee,
capacity?
just less than 60 seconds.
I think the CBN is actually addressing issues in the pharmaceutical and medicine-related area with that 100 billion naira targeted principally at the pharmaceutical sector. We know that we don't produce much drugs organically in Nigeria because of our limitation. And I think that fund targeted at the pharmaceutical sector would help.
Thank you. Let's quickly take sports before we sign off our guest.
Turkish giants Galatasaray are looking to extend Henry Onyekuru's loan deal for another season. Onyekuru joined Galatasaray on a 6-month loan deal from French Ligue 1 side Monaco in January. The versatile winger who arrived Monaco from Premier League outfit Everton last summer featured in 4 league games for the Principality club before making the switch. Monaco are prepared to sell Onyekuru this summer, but Galatasaray are only willing to take him on loan due to financial constraints. Both clubs are also talking about the possibility of a swap deal that would see Morocco international Younes Belhanda move to Monaco and Onyekuru join Galatasaray on a permanent transfer. The 23-year-old has scored 1 goal and recorded 2 assists in 10 league appearances for Fatih Terim's men since his arrival in January. In tennis, French Open organizers estimate up to 60% of the usual capacity will be allowed inside Roland Garros when the rescheduled event is held in September. A maximum of 4 people will be able to sit together on the main courts with an empty seat between groups. On the other courts, 1 seat out of 2 will be empty when the main tournament starts on 27th September. The US Open is being held without any spectators in attendance in New York from 31st August to 13th September. Wimbledon was cancelled this year for the first time since World War II because of the coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, top seed Novak Djokovic and his wife Yelena have tested negative for coronavirus 9 days after testing positive. The world number 1 along with Grigor Dimitrov, Borna Koric and Viktor Troicki all returned positive tests after playing at the Adria Tour event. Novak Djokovic and his wife Yelena tested negative for COVID-19 as the most recent test they took in Belgrade showed, said a statement. They felt no symptoms and took the test after consulting with doctors. The statement from the 17-time Grand Slam winners management team added, they spent the last 10 days in self-isolation upon returning from Zadar in Croatia, having adhered to all COVID-19 protocols and safety measures.
All right, we are done with today's edition of Good Morning Nigeria. Big appreciation to Ni Kinshiju, investment and financial analyst, and of course, Professor Ken Ife, development economist, for joining us. And we do regret the absence of the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. I am Claire Delabu Abdurrazak. See you next week.
Enjoy your weekend, stay safe and be well. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.